Good morning. This is Jeff. We're starting a little early today because smart me forgot to bring my charging cord. So we're going to do the best we can with the time we have. This has been a little interesting week with uh, people going through a lot of struggles right now. So we pray for them and we pray that we're able to get through this and do the best we can. I invite you to turn with me to Luke chapter 11, and we're going to start in verse 29 this morning. We hope you're doing well. Luke chapter 11 and verse 29. It says, "Woe, when the crowds were increasing, he began to say, 'This generation is an evil generation. It seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. The queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will rise up to judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here.'" Jesus, in this back part of Luke 11, he's really going to call some people to task. We began chapter 11 dealing with demons and Jesus casting out demons, people questioning the method with which he's able to cast out demons. And so he addressed that, but now he's addressing basic belief. Jesus' conclusion is that this is a wicked generation. If miracle working was part of Jesus' ministry, then why is it wicked to ask for a sign? Well, it's not just the asking of the sign, it's the intent with which the sign is asked. When dealing with Jesus, reading what Jesus says, reading what Jesus requests, or read what Jesus is talking about in his various discussions, it's not just about what a person says, it's about the motive, the intent, the purpose with which the person is speaking. These people who are asking for Jesus a sign, it's asking Jesus to prove himself. It's not entreating the Lord to heal my loved one. It is prove to me who you are because you need to prove yourself to me. And Jesus says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You have my teachings, you have my behavior, you have my character, you have my interactions, but you also have the miracles. The miracles are part of it, but it wasn't supposed to be the whole. It's supposed to be part of a total package. And so that's the problem. And that's how come Jesus is going to just tell them, look, you're wicked because you're asking me to prove myself to you. You want to know who I am? The only sign that you're going to get from me to show you exactly who I am is going to be the sign of Jonah. Jonah the prophet who spent 3 days in the belly of a fish before he was coughed up on the shore so that he could go up to Nineveh. That's the sign. Now, those of us, again, it's all of us, who live on the backside of the death, burial, and resurrection, we're able to put this together. Oh, he's talking about the 3 days in the tomb before he was raised. That's going to be the sign. That's going to be the final sign to show Jesus who he is. Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites, but it wasn't just because of what Jonah said. If you know the story of Jonah, Jonah at best was a half-hearted prophet. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to take part. Again, it took a storm and a fish in order to get Jonah there in the first place. But he was still a sign, not because of his words. He also had an appearance. What would a person look like who spent 3 days in the belly of a fish? And also, what would they smell like? The person who spent 3 days in the belly of a fish. Jesus is also supposed to be a sign to this generation through his words. He's not going to be identified as the Messiah by the miracles alone. He is going to be identified by that total nature that he carries. A case in point is the Queen of Sheba. Jesus also talks about how the Queen of Sheba will rise in judgment against this generation. But again, why? What does the Queen of Sheba have to do with any of this? Well, if you go back to the Old Testament, the Queen of Sheba just heard about Solomon's knowledge, just Solomon's wisdom, and that alone got her interested to go and see Solomon so that she could hear his wisdom. And she goes. She's also a Gentile, and so that's another reason Jesus is using her as an example. It's like, hey, look, you Jews, you think you're hot stuff just because you're Jews, but no, you're missing it, you being the Jewish people. But this Gentile who just heard of the wisdom of Solomon went to see him and there was a benefit for her going. Now Jesus is trying to tell the people there's someone greater than Jonah and there's someone greater than Solomon here with you today. And again, that pagan city Nineveh, they were blessed because of the message of Jonah. The Gentile, the Queen of Sheba, she was blessed because of the wisdom of Solomon. Now, you, present day Jews in Jesus' time, you have the Messiah interacting with you right now, and you're missing it. You're missing it, and you're going to regret it one day. And so that's what he's talking about there with the sign of Jonah. Maybe when they get that, they'll understand what they missed. This is one of those reasons why 3,000 were cut to the quick on the day of Pentecost and were baptized, because it's finally hit them. What had we done? And so, again, Jesus planting seeds for what's going to happen later. In verse 33, it says, no one after lighting a lamp puts it in a cellar or under a basket, but on a stand, so that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. Therefore, be careful lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part of dark, it will be wholly bright, as which a lamp with its rays gives you light. Jesus is going back to this lamp imagery. He used the lamp imagery back in Luke 8, talking about how light needs to shine out. But he still uses the same basic parable, but he's going to apply it in a slightly different way. His usage here is the idea that he being Jesus, is light. Now, why does Jesus go out in the crowds? It is so his light can be seen. This is the idea. Jesus just didn't stay in one place and just wait for the people to come to him. Jesus went out and outside the countryside. He walked to various places. He went to various villages. He did a lot of things around the Sea of Galilee in that area, but he wasn't stationary to a place. Modern day Christians sometimes have the thought of, if people want to know who God is or how to find Jesus, they know where we are, and with the expectation being on those who are lost to come to them for the answers. And it's like, no, we need to be willing to go out. We need to be willing to take the message out, shine light out, because the point of light is to shine out darkness. And so light needs to go to a dark place in order for it to do its job. And so the light can be seen. He then goes into this extra parable about the eye, how the eye is the lamp of the body. So how is that eye the lamp of the body? Well, putting a modern spin on it, it's the same thought of how the eye is the organ with which we see. Okay, so when we insist on seeing good things, our body is full of light. For example, this is why Paul wrote Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, which says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Why is it that Paul talks about how we need to keep thinking about all this good stuff? Because perception can equal our reality. And if we're willing to perceive goodness and be around goodness and to immerse ourselves in goodness and everything else that can be considered good, it can change the way we think. It can change the way we live. It can change the way we perceive life, and also it will keep us away from dark places. It just doesn't happen. This is one of those hard truths that people have to learn today. Depression and anxiety are rampant in our country. One of the reasons why they're rampant in our country is that people who are suffering from these things, they feel like that happiness, or some of them feel, I don't want to generalize, but some of them feel like that happiness and calmness and peace just happen. No, well, it doesn't. And so people are waiting for it to just happen. It's not the way it works. If we want to have peace, if we want to have light, if we want to have all that, we have to go to where the light is. We have to bathe ourselves in the light, and we have to fill ourselves up with the light. So not only seeking after God per se, but also taking the time and the effort to eliminate those other elements in our life, which brings us down into the darkness. Music, movies, books, websites, the various chat rooms and things of that nature that we like. Those things that keep us down. If we want to be up, if we want to be full of light, we have to go where the light is. We can't expect to be bathed in light if we're still down in where the darkness is. And this is what Jesus is trying to say. If we insist on seeing bad things, our bodies will be full of darkness. And again, not only does Jesus talk about this, Paul addresses this as well. One of the places he addresses this is in Romans chapter 1. Romans 1 and verse 28, it's part of a bigger section, but you look to where it really picks up. It says, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. So it talks about how God gave them up. This interesting phrase, this interesting teaching out of Romans 1 of how God would give people delusions, people who are bound and determined to go against God and what God says. God's, in essence, says, fine, you don't want to have a relationship with me? Fine. And he gives them delusions, or he gives them thoughts, and gives them a debased mind that says, okay, if you don't want me, this is what it's going to be like without me. But how did it get to that point? Well, it got to that point because this is what people chose. God didn't just do it. People chose it. And God just said, okay. And so if we don't want to go down that path, then we cannot fill ourselves up with darkness. If we want to have God in our life, we must fill ourselves up with light. And what Jesus is trying to tell the people here is, if you want to understand me, if you want to truly see what the Messiah is all about, you have to be willing to be filled up with light. Well, what is light? I, being Jesus, I am light. Do we follow the light? And if we follow the light, our entire being can be bathed in light. We must see, follow, and take in Jesus's light. And so you have people who follow light, and then you have people who don't follow light. And Jesus will talk about those who follow light in other parts of the Gospels. These are those who are going to be followers of him. These are people who are going to take up their cross daily and follow Jesus. They're the ones who are going to seek Jesus' rest. They're going to be the ones who leave everything in order to follow Jesus. These are people who have light. But what about the people who don't have light? Well, Jesus is going to talk about them now. In Luke's rendition of the sermon of, in this case, the 6 woes, it says in verse 37, while Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So he went in and reclined at table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. So the sermon of the 6 woes is about everything Jesus sees as weaknesses, shortcomings and errors in the Pharisees. And just like Matthew's rendition, this is a very hard-hitting, sometimes uncomfortable sermon for the audience, because let's face it, sometimes we still fall into these traps. But what started all this? What was the cause of all this? Well, the cause of all this in Luke's account is that a Pharisee invited Jesus to dinner and noticed that Jesus didn't wash his hands in a ceremonial sense. Again, we're not talking about using soap and water. We're definitely not talking about using Purell. This had nothing to do with stopping the spread of the coronavirus. This was about the ceremonial washing, which, what does that mean? That means that basically what they expected Jesus to do was to either put his hands into some water or have water sprinkled on his hands as a ceremonial washing for a spiritual cleanness before you ate. Jesus didn't do this. Well, why? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, that was a tradition of the fathers. And Jesus never broke the law of Moses, but he shattered the traditions of the fathers all over the place. But two, also, the idea being you need to ceremonially wash your hands in order so that you don't have any unholiness about you. Again, this is Jesus we're talking about. What sins had he committed? What wrongs have he done? None. So he had no reason to be ceremonially clean. But this is the scuttlebutt. This is the big thing that the Pharisees are going to pick out. Now, again, how many of us would love to have Jesus over to our house for an evening? Would we feel an intimidation? Well, I'm sure, but would we also hope that we had a similar type experience, the same way that Mary and Martha and some other people who welcomed Jesus into their home, and they actually had a pleasant evening of listening to Jesus speak to the people and being surrounded by that light that we were just talking about? That would be wonderful. But again, the Pharisees, no, you didn't wash your hands. That's what we're going to talk about. So this launches Jesus into this sermon of the six woes. And it's almost the thought is, okay, you have this against me. If we're going to talk about shortcomings, then let's talk about shortcomings. And so he starts. This could have very easily been a 7 woe sermon, but it starts with a preamble and then 6 woes. It says, now you Pharisees, and this is verse 39, now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. The preamble, the outside perfection does not equal the inside holiness. Excuse me. Outside perfection does not equal inside holiness. The Pharisees put on a front with their robes and their phylacteries, those boxes that they wore on their forehead, which carried parts of the law written inside this box. Their tassels, they felt like they had to have longer tassels than everybody else because, God told them to wear tassels, but he didn't give any indication to the length of the tassel necessary. But the Pharisees believed that the longer the tassel, the more holy you were. They had boxes on their head because God in the law told them you need to write the law and keep it on your hand and in your head. They took that literally. But again, the idea of bigger being better, it wasn't just about a phylactery. It was how big we can make that thing in order that we can look more holy. We do the same stuff today, just different. You can go through church history, for example. Another interesting one is a theologian at times, their holiness was perceived by the length of their beard, which is why you had some pictures of old-fashioned theologians that would have a beard that's sweeping the floor almost, because they put all of their holiness into an outward appearance. Look at how holy I am because of the length of my beard. Look at how holy I am because of what kind of hat I wear on Easter. Look at how holy I am because of the length of my tie on Sunday morning. Look at how holy I am because of the suit I wear to church. And, we do the same stuff today. We try to wear an outward appearance. We try to mask ourselves up with a whole bunch of fake stuff that doesn't really matter, thinking that as long as my makeup is right, as long as my clothes are right, as long as I'm wearing a tie or my shoes are shiny, that somehow that makes me holy. That does not make me holy. It never made me holy. That was an outward appearance. And just like the Pharisees washing the outside of the cup, bravo, your outside is clean. But what's going on the inside? The inside is still dirty. In fact, the inside is dead. You're full of greed. You're full of wickedness. You're full of hate. You're full of not caring. And he'll address these thoughts as we go through this. But you feel like you just throw some bones to the Lord, then everything inside of you is going to be clean. Why do we think God is so easily fooled by a perfect outside appearance? God is not fooled by that. God has never been fooled by that. And so after this, if that didn't wake him up enough, now we go into the woes. The first woe, but woe to you Pharisees, fools. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without the neglecting of the others. Woe number one, you tithe your material possessions, but you neglect justice and the love of God. Again, as far as the outward stuff that the Pharisees believed that they had to do, they were pretty good at it, and that including the tithing. They put such an importance of the tithe. And not only did they tithe their money, they tithe their herbs and everything else they had. But the problem is that while they were tithing everything they had on a material basis, they were withholding justice, mercy, and love from their fellow man. Again, put yourself back into a Jewish mindset back in the first century. Now, again, we've talked about this before, but the Pharisees came to be because there was a need. There was a perceived need that we needed a police force, so to speak, in order to keep the Jewish people on the right track with the law of Moses. The people came back from captivity. They've suffered some other various captivities because of straying into pagan beliefs, following the practices of their Gentile neighbors, which led them to desecrate the ways of God. So the belief was that we need a class of people that would keep us on the straight and narrow. Apparently, having priests isn't enough. The judges, most of the judges were a joke. Same thing with the kings. Most of the kings were a joke. They were not suitable for keeping us loyal to God. So let's try this Pharisee experiment. And so you might say it started off in a good place. It started off with the right intention, but throw 400 years or so at it and look at where we are now. Where the Pharisees were at the beginning supposed to be guides in order to help the people stay holy to God, they became intimidators. If you were a Jew back in the first century and you saw a Pharisee coming your way, would you be excited? Would you be happy? If you were a Jew and you saw on your weekly calendar that the Sabbath was coming, would you be happy to see the Sabbath coming, or have you by this point started seeing the Sabbath as a burden because of the way that the Pharisees watched everybody and their practice of the Sabbath? You can look at various places in the Gospels where somebody would be healed on the Sabbath, say, crippled people who have not walked in 30 years carrying their mat on the Sabbath day. And instead of rejoicing at the fact that this man is healed, the Pharisees are, why are you carrying your mat? These are not happy people. But hey, they tithed. They did all the stuff they were supposed to do, but mercy, no. Justice, can't be bothered. Love, forget about it. How dare they? How dare they? Now, Jesus doesn't curse the tithing, but what he tells them is that while you were doing the tithe, you should have also been willing to include the mercy. You have to done all of it. Not just pick and choose which law you're going to follow while forsaking the others, but instead doing all of it, using mercy as much as you would tithe and all the way down the line. Stop trying to hunt and peck with what laws you're going to follow. The second woe is in verse 42, 43. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love the best seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. So woe number two is that they love the seats and the greetings more than they love their fellow man and also God. Again, if you were a average Jew, how would you feel seeing a Pharisee coming your way? But flip that around. Was it like to be a Pharisee? Well, to be a Pharisee in this particular time and place, you were in a position where basically every time you came across somebody, people were falling over themselves to make sure that they acted correctly and that they were doing the right things and that they stayed in your good graces. So if you were all going to banquet together and they had a ticket for a better seat than yours, they would give you the better seat because they wanted to be in your good graces. If you're a Pharisee, especially, again, there were still decent Pharisees in the time of Jesus, Nicodemus, for example, Joseph of Arimathea, and some others. In fact, we're told that there were Pharisees who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They were just being intimidated by the bad Pharisees. So that's who we're talking about. So if you were a bad Pharisee, you expected the best seats. You expected to be greeted. You expected for everybody to know your name. Did you know who everybody was? Probably not, but you expected to be known. And you loved that. You just felt that this was the most important part of your life, being known, being respected. But the problem is that it's seated on pride. For many, the role of the Pharisee became a vehicle for their own stubborn pride, where they thought they were the greatest thing since sliced bread. But the more of our love of self goes up, the more our love for God and our fellow man goes down. And then again, we're talking about that prideful love of self. So again, that's a woe. You love yourself more than you love your fellow man. Okay. Woe 3, verse 44. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it. You're like, what in the world is that supposed to mean? Okay. You are sources of unrecognizable corruption because of your wickedness. Now, again, put yourself back into law of Moses days. It made a person unclean to be around a dead body. Now, especially if you were a Nazirite, being around death automatically, that stopped that Nazirite vow. That was a no-no. You couldn't do that. So you had to start over. But for Jews in general, they couldn't be around a dead body without being ceremonially unclean, and they had to go through a cleaning process before they could be seen as clean again. So imagine, and it doesn't matter if they know if there's a dead body around or not, the corruption is still there. Now, if you're in a cemetery, Jews would avoid cemeteries unless they actually absolutely had to go because it made them ceremonially unclean. So as long as there was some sort of grave marker, you could avoid where dead people were laying. But suppose you were walking through an area and people were buried underneath the ground and there was no grave marker. Well, you're making yourself unclean, and unless there's an odor, you're not realizing that you're making yourself unclean. So you're going to carry on doing all those things that a clean person can do without realizing, oh, I need to go through a time of purification. This is Jesus' point here. You're a bunch of unmarked graves around the Jewish people. You have corrupted your office to the point that people are coming into your presence, and you, Pharisees, bad Pharisees, by your wickedness, are making people unclean, and they do not even realize it. That's the danger. Now, again, why did the people allow the Pharisees to take over the way they did, or to be intimidated by the Pharisees, or give the Pharisees the respect that the Pharisees believed that they deserved if they were wrong? Well, it's because, intimidation is one. And then again, 400 years at least that these people have been around, that's still like 150 years longer than America's been around. This is a long period of time. A lot of history has gone down with these people in these offices, working with the people. And so there's a tradition there. And we all know how people love their traditions, but they were wrong. And so through their wickedness, they were actually bringing hardships and unrighteousness to the people of Israel instead of being that help that the people wanted them to be. Okay. Well, number 4. Well, then it says, I love this in verse 45, it says, one of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also." Oh, for Pete's sake. Now, let's not forget that we're in the same chapter where they're calling Jesus Beelzebub and the devil and all this stuff. But oh my goodness, Jesus is hurting my feelings. I'm a sarcastic person by nature, but there's a couple of rules of sarcasm that I try to follow. Sometimes I slip because I forget who I'm talking to, but these are 2 rules that I try to follow when it comes to sarcasm. And first off is that if I can't take it, I shouldn't do it. We are surrounded by people like this who love to mouth off, but as soon as somebody else mouths off to them, they crumble and they cry and they talk about how people hurt my feelings, or I can't believe they said such and such, and so on. The world is full of these people right now, and social media has actually increased the number of people like this that we have today. All right, here's the truth. If you can't take insults, don't insult. If you can't take sarcasm, don't do it. And that includes me, and I believe this includes everybody. If you can't take it, don't do it. The Pharisees have just finished, at least the way Luke tells it, claiming that Jesus is casting out devils by the power of Beelzebub. And they have no problem speaking against Jesus or speaking against his followers or griping and complaining. And in other gospels, we find how they believe that the Jewish people know nothing and that they're the smartest, that what you're saying is insulting us. Well, goodness sakes, man, if you can't take it, don't do it. Who do you think you are? But the other rule of sarcasm is you got to know the audience. All right. Now, if you're dealing with people who can't handle sarcasm, it's the person who's saying the sarcasm should be able to read their audience and to tell who can he use sarcasm with and who can't. That's a self-control issue. But that's not what Jesus is doing here. Jesus is telling them truth. He's laying on the line truth of their shortcomings. And the Pharisees, who love to lord their righteousness over everybody, is getting a good hard look of themselves in a mirror, and they don't like it. Are they going to change? No. But instead, they're going to say, no, Jesus is just insulting us. Jesus is disrespecting us. No, he's not. He's saying truth. And so he continues on. It doesn't stop Jesus at all. Jesus doesn't even, if Jesus stopped, that was just to catch his breath, because he continues on in verse 46. And he said, "Woe to you, lawyers, also, for you load people with burdens and hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers." It says, you are a burden to the people and refuse to be a source of help and refuge. Again, what was the role of the Pharisee originally? To keep people away from idolatry. What was the role of the priesthood? To help people in their holiness with God. What's the role of the preacher? What's the role of the elder? What's the role of the deacon? It's all about helping people to maintain a relationship with God. But instead, if we make that job or make that task difficult for the people, we make the burden unbearable to bear, what are we doing? Again, it's that Sabbath idea. Would you be looking forward to a Sabbath day if you were a Jew in the first century? I don't think so, because the Sabbath was supposed to be a blessing, but because of the traditions of men and the hard-nosed view of the bad Pharisees, it became a burden instead of a blessing. Remember what Jesus said, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. Yes, we have to follow. Yes, we have to bear a burden. But if we choose to follow Jesus and bear the burdens of Christ, it's an easy yoke and light. So the people have to continue on. The Pharisees, though, burden the people load them up with a whole bunch of junk that's not important. And then they have the audacity to refuse to help the people carrying the burden. You can go to Acts chapter 15, the council in Jerusalem, where you have the Jews who are saying, no, the Gentiles must follow the law of Moses, be circumcised, have the feast days, and da 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 da. And it's Peter, I believe, who says, why are we going to load them up with a bunch of laws that we weren't able to follow? That was the issue. Instead of being a help, they're trying to be a hindrance. And that's a woe to them for it. If we're going to be guides for people to follow God, we need to be willing to get down into the pits and walk with the people in the mire in order to help people get closer to God. Okay, woe 5. My battery's dying, so I got to pick it up. Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed, so you are witnesses and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them and you build their tombs. Therefore, also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell it will be required of this generation. You know, the Jews are the descendants of the people who killed the prophets. You know, Stephen in Acts, before Stephen is dragged out into the street and stoned like a dog, he makes the same point. Was there ever a man of God that the Jews did not persecute? It's a short list. It really is a short list. The Jews love to hold themselves up as being the first followers of God, but the history tells that they were also great persecutors of those who actually followed God. And so that's really going to bear out with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Yes, Jesus had to die. He came to die. He came to be crucified. But when you read the Gospels, don't forget to see how much the Jews sold themselves. You might say sold themselves to the devil, sold themselves to evil, however you want to phrase it, but sold themselves in order to have Jesus killed. They really showed the evil nature of man. But again, that was part of the point. But they are descendants of people who killed the prophets, and they're the generation that will kill the Messiah, and people still hold this against them. It's a racial slur. It's a stupid racial slur, but it's actually a prophesied racial slur when people would call the Jews Christ killers. This is going to be something that follows them throughout history. But they say, no, we're such great people. You have disobeyed God and have harmed God's messengers for centuries, if not millennia, since the beginning. He goes all the way back to Abel, all the way back to faithful Abel through Zechariah. It's been a hardship for people who actually followed God. Woe to you for allowing it to continue on. The last woe. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who are entering. Again, it's the idea of how you keep knowledge away from the people. I was actually able to do a Bible study this past Wednesday night with a family that I was able to meet, and some of them were coming out of some other religious groups. And this was a big talking point that night was, if you look at the Bible, the idea of God's word is anybody can come to know God. Anybody can come to know God's wisdom. Anybody can seek to follow his will. And you do not need to have somebody in between you and God. You don't need some sort of representative outside of Jesus Christ, but you don't need any sort of human representative or middleman between you and God, because God's will can be known. Now, the people need to learn this. People need to study. People need to grow, and they might need some people to help them along the way. But it is, for example, me, myself as a preacher, it's not my role to be the doorman. You will be able to know God, but you will not. I don't get, that's not for me to do. And it's not for me to hold the keys of knowledge, to hold the keys of truth, and just give it to some people while withholding it for others. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And people aren't supposed to come and have to sway me in order to let them to know about Jesus. You do not believe in Jesus, and you are keeping others from believing in Jesus as well. And so that's how he wraps it up. And so very quickly it says, As he went away from there, the scribes and the Pharisees began to press him hard and to provoke him to speak about many things, lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say. So again, it's this idea of, okay, the battle lines have been drawn. They're not even really listening anymore. They're just waiting to hear something that he has to say that they think they can use against him. Hard-hitting lesson. I wish I had more time to go into it. Maybe we'll do this in a live session. My battery's about to die, so I'm having to shut it down for now.